Hello, welcome to Venice, the port and gateway in Italy to the East Mediterranean and Asia for centuries. The powerful republic whose commercial and domains and posts during the Renaissance extended along the coasts of Croatia, Greece, Cyprus, and far beyond. Here, the companions whom we saw taking a bow in Montmartre back in 1534 gathered together again. It was more or less 3 years later, October 1537. What had happened in those 3 years? Well, Ignatius had gone through some theological studies without completing them in Paris. At a certain point, his recurrent stomach problems made it impossible for him to remain in that disadvantageous climate, and the doctors recommended him to return home to his native air. Yes, at Spatia. Ignatius left Paris at the end of January 1535 with the intention to get back to his homeland and do apostolic works in his hometown, and then travel to Venice, where he would wait for his companion to reach him as promised. Once back in Aspatia, instead of reach to the castle of his family, he decided to live in the little tiny hospital right on the other side of the river, marking for his people a sign for his new life. Now, that little hospital, a two-floor, half-timbered house, has been fabulously restored and hosts a museum that we visit with students every year. It is really impressive as it shows in a powerful way the daily life that was back in the Renaissance. Close to it, a chapel that Ignatius used to preach at, gathering crowds of fellow citizens who were curious and impressed by the Inigo that had come back from Paris. In November 1535, Ignatius set out for Italy and reaches Venice at the very end of the year. He got in contact with a wide array of Venetians, including humanists, nobility, notable persons, and even with Giampietro Carafa, the co-founder of the Theatines and a future pope. Certainly not a great friend of the Jesuits, I must say. With Carafa, it seems clear that Ignatius had different opinions about how to conduct apostolic lives. Despite the Jesuits who would be often confused with the Theatines later in the Italian peninsula, they were both new religious order in town, their charisms seemed quite different. But we must remind that here, at this moment in Venice, Ignatius still did not have in mind the idea of founding any religious order. The first thing he had to think about was waiting for his companions to come and sail together to Jaffa and the Holy Land. The companions, who had been growing to the number of 10 by then, included Jean Codure, Claude Gier, and Pascal Brevet, as Father Padberg called them once in a great paper of his, the three forgotten founders. Except for Ignatius, who was waiting in Venice, they set out from Paris on November 15, 1536. As Candido Dalmases writes in the biography he wrote about Ignatius, they wore their long and rather threadbare student gowns, held up in front by a belt to enable them to walk more freely. Their heads were covered with a broad-brimmed hat. They carried a rosary hung about their necks and also by straps slanting across the shoulders, a leather knapsack containing their books and notes. Each carried a tall pilgrim staff in his hand. Well, the expectations and intentions were clear from the attire of these companions. Now, in Venice, they were greeted by Ignatius and hosted in two hospitals of the city. As you might remember, traveling to the Holy Land required a special permission by the Pope, which was granted annually but in a certain period. So the companions devoted themselves to the service of the sick until the time came for setting out to Rome and getting that permission. They traveled together with Ignatius waiting back in Venice. On April the 27th, 1537, they obtained permissions to proceed to Jerusalem, and for those of them who were not ordained yet to receive sacred orders from any bishop, even though he be outside the territory of his jurisdiction. When they returned to Venice, everything was then in good order to begin the pilgrimage. But that was not their fate. In that year, not a single ship sailed from Venice with destination to the Holy Land, as rumors had spread that, given the alliance, it was a secret one, between Venice and the Pope, it could be very dangerous for any galleon cross the Adriatic Sea and the rest of the Mediterranean, especially in waters patrolled by the Turks. So, in the waiting for things to evolve, the companions managed to get ordained in Venice. And since the situation was dragging behind, they came to the decision of investing their time in doing apostolic work in the cities and towns under the domain of the Serenissima Repubblica of Venice, separating from each other to maximize their endeavor and remaining close enough to Venice if the situation would have offered the opportunity for sailing to the Holy Land. At a certain point, they found themselves together again in a city not so far from Venice, Vicenza. And it was clear that political relations were not getting better between Venice and the Ottoman Empire. So there was still no chance in any foreseeable future to travel. It is at this moment, January 1538, that they decided to prolong their 1 year long vow, the one that they took in Paris, and still hoping for a good, unexpected development. It belongs to this period of fantastic source that is still excellently conserved at the Archivum Romanum Societatis Jesu. And the academic director there, Father Brian McQuarta, is always generous to show and talk with our students when we visit RC about that. And it is a handwritten book, a log, that the companions kept keeping record of their conversations, their opinions, of what they should have done and pursue beyond a pilgrimage that seemed far from coming. They were undergoing a process of deliberation for what they wanted to be as a group. One huge result of this communal process of deliberation is certainly that they proceeded with the idea of formally binding themselves with one another in an institution they were to create. Let us read from the Chronicon of Juan de Polanco, the first secretary of the order. The name is the Compañía de Jesús. The name was taken before they reached Rome. When discussing among themselves what they should name themselves in reply to someone who asked what was their congregation, made up of 9 or 10 persons, all immediately betook themselves to prayer and to thinking what name would be most fitting. And seeing that they had among themselves no other superior except for Jesus Christ, whom alone they desired to serve, it seems to them most fitting that they should take the name of him whom they had as their head by calling themselves the compañía, the company, de Jesus. Now, in English, compañía is normally translated as society. And it is right, for its Latin etymology bears the same exact meaning. Socius is our companion, like another word with the same root as compañía, comites. And compañía, comitatus, and societas have the same nuance of and the connection between persons somehow connected in a journey together. What the companions came to deliberate here in the Serenissima Repubblica of Venice was that, as priests as they had become, they wanted to remain soci, comites, compagni, with one another, and particularly with the master to the imitation of whom they had decided to devote their lives, Jesus Christ. Would this project be well received in Rome? We will learn something more about this on our next and last stop. But before entering the gates of the Urbe, the city of Rome, just wait for me at the little chapel of La Storta. We need first to see if that master would agree with the companion's plans or not.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the city of Venice. Warm greetings to all of our pilgrims as we enter this important city. As you are aware from the excerpts that we've included from the autobiography of St. Ignatius and Ribadeneira's Life of Ignatius, the city of Venice is important because of the deliberations that took place there among Ignatius and his companions. You've listened to Professor Cristiano Casalini speak about the significance and the way of proceeding that occurred in Venice. Today, I'd like to share with you some reflections upon the theme that we have chosen to accompany this important city, and that theme is conversation. We will soon reproduce an early Jesuit source titled The Conversational Word of God. This little gem of a book discusses the role of spiritual conversation in everyday life. The title is what I want to call attention to right now because of the insight that it contains within it. I think that many of us feel uncomfortable speaking of God in everyday conversation, that somehow it's inappropriate to do so, or that speaking of God will make others feel uncomfortable. Well, this is precisely what we want to overcome, because it is through such conversations that we discover the hand of God at work, and where a union of hearts and minds might emerge among human beings, which can be interpreted as a sign of the Spirit at work in our daily lives. You see, our ability to speak of God with familiarity presupposes that we speak to God with familiarity. Many people seem to feel that they're not worthy of such a familiar exchange with God. But as Christians, this is precisely the reason that God becomes human. The person of Jesus is the desire of God the Father to be accessible to us, available to us, for us, person to person. Many people feel that they're too broken to come before God, but it is in actuality that God desires unconditionally for us to be close to Him without self-editing. The Jesuit William Barry has a magnificent little book titled Praying the Truth. In it, he describes the need for this kind of conversational exchange between God and human beings. Father Barry says, sanity, you see, consists in feeling in my bones that God loves me, warts and all, and that nothing I do will change God's love for me. It's insane to feel that God's love depends on me in any way. When I hesitate or feel unworthy of God's friendship, I'm making myself the arbiter of who God is. God, in other words, is, for me, someone who does not like the kind of person I am. That really is insane, isn't it? When we begin to feel God's unconditional love and to trust it, we begin to believe in God, not in some idol of our own imagining. So sanity, faith, and friendship with God go hand in hand, and they are abetted by truth-telling. It seems that Father Barry's insight is that our ability to come before God is our response to His unconditional love. If we truly believe that nothing separates us from the love of God, then we feel the confidence of coming to God with whatever life is bringing to us. Barry writes, over and over again, we discover that telling God the truth, no matter how unsavory the truth is, pulls us out of self-absorption and folly and moves us toward becoming the images of God we are created to be. In other words, if you and I want to become better versions of ourselves, then we sooner ought to be transparent before God, the better we become. Additionally, here's what's even more interesting and important. Our ability to do this with God will have an effect upon our ability to engage in conversation with one another. How does this happen? I think it's a very gentle process. And all of us can develop capacities to speak of the interior movements of our hearts in ways that are appropriate and sensible, given the relationships that are a part of who we are. With certain people, I speak of the movements of God in a very subtle way, sharing hopes and visions, challenges and fears. With other people, I speak of the movements of God with clarity and directness because we have that level of communication among us. The important thing is for the interior life to be given the opportunity to be explored, deepened, and shared. Christian discernment is simply not decision making. Christian discernment is the gift of detecting the hand of God at work, calling us to greater receptivity of His divine love, and putting light on such movements so that they might magnify the good for all of us. Likewise, it is to put light on the distractions, the doubts, the temptations that distance us from that divine love, so that we become better and better at detecting what comes from God and what does not come from God. And this cannot be done in isolation. This is where the community, where friendship, where the conversational word of God comes to our assistance. Our ability to be brave in sharing these interior movements is a sign of spiritual growth. Even more so, our ability to receive such sharing from our sisters and brothers with careful and gentle listening is truly a sign of the good spirit among us. A goal for this week. What would it be like for you to engage in a spiritual conversation? Remember, we cannot demand that other people reciprocate, so you need to be thoughtful about with whom you engage. The hope is that in such a conversation, we share grace. Where is it that you have felt the presence of God at work in your life, in our world? What's that been like for you? And then to listen attentively to what the other person has to say about their own experience of the inner heart. Again, welcome to Venice. I hope you have a great week here, one that is filled with the conversational word of God and gentle, thoughtful listening.